So we're switching to certification now. So we've done a fair bit. Certification is working. So basically, you know, hats off to Josh and the team. We're doing 1 million tests on 100,000 records from each resource. 93% of all the MLSs have been certified, as Sam said, on opening day. Even with DD 2.0, it's fairly new. 20% MLS is certified in 6 months, but covers 50% of the agents in the industry. So that's great. Clients are definitely having to do less vendor-specific coding. And as a result of all these tests that we've done, we have lots of analytics. We can look at performance, as Josh showed yesterday, or was it the day before? We look at fields. We have field information lookups, all the usages. It allows us to you know, add to the data dictionary based on what's really being used in the industry. It's been great. We don't foresee any large changes. We haven't had any for quite a while. There's just been very specific minor changes. So as a result of that, we are thinking of just slightly changing the way these CERT meetings are done. We'll keep the time slot. So if we don't have a meeting in that time slot, you can save it as a I'm working time for your own self. But the thought is that the previous transport meeting, which is usually 2 weeks before CERT, we'll decide if there's a CERT meeting, and then we'll let everybody know, and we'll cancel the meeting if we're not gonna have it. That way, we don't have to have meetings if we don't have anything pending. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. In terms of some changes we've done, in the Data Dictionary 2.1, we are allowing the @reso.context to be a field in the payload, and that makes it compatible with the RESO common format. It also gives it more clarity if that payload goes somewhere else, that you know where it came from. Another thing we've done is country and state of province. We agreed to use the ISO 3166-2, which has the country and state or province, and it's separated by a dash. So we're going to separate into 2 fields for our purposes, because we want them as separate lookups, shall we say. And you can get the ISO value by just concatenating them with a dash in the middle. We noticed that the media image size description field was being used in very strange and wonderful ways. Nothing to do with what it was supposed to be used for, so we all agreed to just deprecate the field. Again, we have to have the whole discussion later about how we're going to delete these eventually from the data dictionary. We had some discussions on property type, property subtype. There was a thought that we were going to actually enforce those to be correct. But a lot of discussion happened on that, and we decided not to enforce them at this time because there's too many ambiguities and edge cases that were coming up. School fields, we just talked a little bit about that. We've been talking about it to some degree. I think it sounds like we need to pursue that a little more, but we're definitely looking into ways of getting that standardized. Future changes. Yes, we're looking at, so that every time Josh runs the tests on your server, we don't overload the server, we spend less time looking at ways of optimizing the sample sizes and how many records you're getting. If you've already been certified, we can do some things to improve that. We have a ticket that's created for that. Hopefully that'll increase the speed of testing, reduce load on your servers, on the RESO servers, and that should be a positive for everybody. Another thing we're going to have to do is when RCP, what was it now? I can't remember. When the days of market RCP comes through and is certified, we'll have to create certification tests for it. So that's something that we'll have to do. Pardon me? 51?
Actually, if you could go back, if you don't mind, I can say.
Sure.
So, on the sampling
There you go.
on the sampling requests, right now, the way that certification rules have been passed, We go through every expansion for each resource, and the first pass is the top-level resource. Then we do one pass for each expansion defined on the resource, that's why there's a lot of extra traffic. If you have 9 expansions, that's actually 10 passes, including the initial pass. That's a lot of data. So it's fine. The reason why we did that is that we don't have a really good way right now to know which of the expansions we can use. Sometimes if we try to use them all, we get an error on the server that we try to request too much data. But there are a lot of vendors out there who actually would like us to try expanding everything because their servers do support that, and that's very convenient that they can get everything in one pass. So I think there's kind of a need here in addition to this to add a new rule to try expanding everything, at one time. And then as far as the optimization for this future change, what we want to do is if we try to sample and we've already found data within that range, we can just randomly pick a resource or to expand in there. We don't have to pull everything, and that will give the same coverage. So it'll cut down on the request, basically. But the first thing is more important. We have several vendors who feel like we're not giving an accurate picture of what their servers can do because we're not trying to expand everything. So I'm kind of curious in the room, people who use expansions on their servers, do you support expanding everything when we're making requests? Or maybe a show of hands of people who don't? Joseph, I see you back there. Do you support everything?
I already told you how I feel about this. Just expand all the resources at one time. I can test so much faster as opposed to making, 15, 20 passes, because I have some MLSs that just happen to have every resource they can possibly have. And we expand a lot off the properties.
Yeah, so if he has 50,
I'm all in favor of this.
Joseph said he's in favor, and if we could expand, that would be great. If it's 15 expansions, that's 16 passes because we also do the top level. So I think the solution for this isn't to try to optimize the algorithm kind of using clever tricks. The solution is just to try to expand everything at once. The only reason why we wouldn't do that is if providers don't support that. They only support like 1 or 2 at a time, and we have to keep testing like we do now. If they support expanding everything, we could just change it to expand everything and make only 2 passes instead.
Yeah, just that there's nothing in the spec that says you need to support X number of expands or all expands, right?
Yeah, we have nothing in the spec right now.
We may have to
We'd have to change the
consider changing
spec.
that.
Yeah, we'd have to change the spec to cover that. Say, if you have expansions, you must support them all, or if you don't, if we ask for all of them, you can't give us an error, basically. You'd have to do whatever you can support. It may be complicated.
Okay, yep,
Thanks, Sergio.
no problem. So there's been talk about client certification. So really the question's open to the room. Is this something that is of value and that we should start doing this? A couple of things that I thought of when I put this slide together was theoretically that could drive more consumers to participate in RESO if they have a way of getting the client certifications. And then they could do like marketing on their own that says, we're a certified RESO client, so you might want to use our services over someone else's. So curious to hear opinions on that one.
Of course, I have some.
I'm really?
On that last point about expanding everything, Al said Livestream needs a cheers and approval button. So he wants us to expand everything too.
Okay.
So we'd like to hear from other providers. Joseph's clapping right now. So yeah, we want to hear from other providers. If you can't do this, please reach out to transport@reso.org. If you can, well, you don't have to. We're just going to do it.
Okay, because it sounds like we're going to look at adding that to the spec, that's a must.
And there could even be 2.1. That's a little bit maybe of a breaking experience.
No.
It might be, 3.0 might be 5 years out for all we know. So if we want to do it now, we'll have to talk about that. The client certification, this requires a little bit of work on RESO's part. We talked about this before, but the only reference server we have right now for providers is the Austin reference server, which is great that we have that. But we can't really tell what the client's doing because we don't have access to their logs or their servers. So RESO is actually rolling out sandbox servers and reference servers. We're working on this right now. The sandbox servers will allow anybody to spin up a test database for any certified data set, which is pretty cool. Like if you have you have an MLS, you have a data set, you don't want to give a new app that's never touched your data set before access to it. You could spin up a realistic test set with completely like license-free data that's not anybody else's data. So on top of that, we could do client certification for replication, for example, because we have the server to do it with, and then add edit's an important one. We could test add edit clients. And then stuff like entity event or webhooks, we could have a server to receive those events, right? So if you're a source of that. I think client certification is important. Behaviors are important, but we need to be careful to define, like from MLSs or from server providers, what kind of things do you want the clients to do and not do? So we'll need to get a group together of best practices that we want to test for.
Yeah, and there's a lot. I think there's a lot of benefit to it as well. Olga, can we? Sorry, Yvonne, then Olga.
I think you should gamify it.
Gamify it.
Every client has a score, and they hit the reference servers, and if they're able to download things without breaking it, able to like be efficient, and and with achievements, and then they could advertise it and
Badges.
yeah, totally. Badges, bananas, you bet, and then that way it becomes a differentiator between clients that have a high score and the clients that have a low score, and it's like MLS will be motivated because the lower scoring clients are going to be more expensive to integrate with.
I feel we need a sticker to go on a computer.
Yes.
Yeah, like one of these. Yeah.
I wanted to roll back to the expand question. And I'm wondering, Josh, why it would need to be a must in the spec before you could test Al's server more efficiently?
We could do it optionally. It doesn't necessarily have to be a must, but if we try it, we need some way to know that that didn't work out, to fall back to the current behavior, a subset maybe.
Right. Or even just start it with like a server setting. Like, Al and whoever back there gets to tick a box on the configuration that says, yeah, just get it done.
Yeah, it's hard for us to know, so we'd have to have extra information because we could try every subset of expansions. That would be rough for us. Combinatorial choices, right? So if we can't do it all of them, the easiest thing is just to fall back to doing one at a time.
Right. So what you're doing now is just a Boolean flag on the server configuration.
Yeah. So if we try all first and that works, we could just skip that part. If we try all first and that fails for some reason, we could just fall back to what we have. I think that's the cleanest way. But it would be great if we could know, like, okay, you can only use these 2 expansions at a time or those 2 expansions at a time. I think to make that really clean, we have to do that in metadata. And it seems like extra machinery to add. We don't need that. We don't need that kind of thing. So I think just a simple approach of try all. If that works, do it. If it doesn't work, just do one at a time. Because we know one at a time works right now.
We're going to put these microphones in quadrants, so people are going to be required to move within your quadrant.
Can't just throw them, Sam?
Oh, come on, Sam. We like seeing you walk around.
So back to what Ivan is saying. We already have customizations, like server-specific customizations for certification anyway, right? Like we allow using a non-standard modification timestamp. Is that just another thing that we could put in there, a Boolean yes or no for that very specific thing?
We don't have non-standard modification timestamp. It's always modification timestamp.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Sorry to pop the bubble there. No, we don't. Even on custom resources, which is kind of, it's not great. It would be nice. We sample and validate local resources too, and local resources don't always have modification timestamp field. But we try it. It would be really cool to try to figure out, okay, if we can't use modification timestamp, maybe we can still do something else. And why is this important? Well, if we're pulling data from local resources, part of testing is just schema validation. And what we're trying to do is make sure that if somebody says they have a string, whether it's standard or local, it shows up as a string in the data, right? That's important, even if it's a local field. Mm-hmm. So it would be really cool to be able to have a better way to sample these local resources so that we can ensure that they're doing what they're supposed to be, local timestamps.
All right, I think we have, yeah.
So, Ivan, I think badges is a great idea. I just wanted to add, Josh, to what you were saying earlier, that about client certification or some kind of endorsement, doesn't have to be full-blown certification for the best behavior, that MLSs need to be careful what they want to be tested for. A lot of that stuff is already in data dictionary. Internet, yes, no. Believe it or not, we still see violations. Public address format, we still see violations. I don't remember the exact field name, but it's an ancient field. It's been in data dictionary from the beginning, right? And of course, more recent case of permission flag for images. It's been out 2-3 years, and we still see some vendors maybe respected 70 to 80% of the time. And it just makes our subscribers lose confidence. Pretty much. We advertise to them, look, we have this option, you can hide the photos, you don't have to delete it, and then the photos still show up, right? And we're all kind of lose credibility when that happens. So it doesn't have to be super sophisticated certification. We can just go through existing fields that present in data dictionary. Very simple, I think.
I mean, I think that makes sense. And like for some of these display fields, the yes, no display, one thing we could do is in the test set, just have some records that have that set to yes or no. We know which records they are. Maybe have the client post back and we ask them, okay, which records can you display on the internet or not display? Right? If there's 3 no's in there, just put the keys of those records in and we could check that easily. So I think there's ways to do this in an automated way. Most important thing though is to get a group together and define at the MLS level what they want to test for. On the technical side, I think we could do that.
Now with the new policy, when we're slicing what gets to be displayed and what doesn't, right? Because broker can still display their own delayed marketing. So that becomes even more critical, that they don't show up on where, these listings do not show up where they're not supposed to show up.
Another great use case for client certification as well.
Yeah, but now you're talking about going out to their websites and trying to find out where they put this data, right? That gets a little complicated.
But we could give them test email data the same way that I just was talking about. But there's another great use for client certification, which is for rules, right? We give the client a set of rules, give them some test data to validate the rules with, and they should get the correct answer, right?
Yeah.
'Cause otherwise, we're going to have all this variance in the parsers and interpreters. We can test some of that stuff in regular certification, but to test it with live data and make sure they get the right answers is important.
Something we need to be careful of. We know you want these things to be used correctly in practice, but NAR MLSs have different business rule requirements than other MLSs. So a listing that can be displayed based on one field in one MLS not be displayed based on one field in a different MLS because they're realtor and non-realtor. So we'll have to really be just cognizant of how much we try to create a certification process based on another organization's policies.
Good point.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think we can take the policy side out of it because we're talking about, is this flag yes or no? It's just a general thing and doesn't really, I mean, that might mean different things for different MLSs when they set that flag to yes or no. But we can just say, here's no, client, what does that mean to you? And just give us the values, right? Kind of separate out the policy side.
Yeah, Sam, to that note, for example, when we have MLSs with different rules about what can be displayed, we just take the UOI, the system organization that it comes from, and show accordingly. So whatever it is coming in the back, we just take the business rules, apply them, and then show it. So we're meeting each different MLS's requirements with one contiguous data set in the back, though.
I think to Sam's point, though, I think we could do this without getting rules involved. I think we could just test raw, yes or no, or is this format correct? That kind of separates it from policy. I agree that that's really a can of worms that we don't want to get into. If MLSs can give us their full business rules with 19, we could validate that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and remember, we can start small, right? We can have some pretty basics client certification, and we can keep adding to it as we go on.
And the small would be internet display yes, no. We tell them, here's 10 listings, and we ask them which ones can you display on the internet, and like 3 of them have yes fields and 7 of them have no fields. How that field got set, we don't really care about that. That's their rules. If we had their rules, we could validate that.
Yep.
But just validating the client understands that you're not supposed to display it in this case, but you can display it in that case, that's enough, I think. Dictionary, that's kind of in the dictionary way, right? So I think we can do it in a very lightweight way that's meaningful without getting too much into the rules.
Josh, how does this actually solve Olga's case where it sounds like it's been part of their actual data set for over a year now and it's just not respected, right? Like if we consume this data, I can tell you exactly what that bit says. Whether or not I show it is completely separate from those things, right? Like, so we would pass that certification potentially, but on whatever application that we're using this in, code is still there.
I mean, that's harder for us to do. I mean,
Sounds like
Sergio said we could go out to look at websites and scrape them. We could have Jason and go, and so I'm not going to do that.
But that's,
could
like
have
I
Jason
said,
go
that's
in
getting
and
a
look
little complicated now. But yeah.
I mean,
That
there
is
are
the
manual
problem,
ways we could
right?
do
A
this.
little complicated.
I would ask what the value there is. Like, if we have a client that was certified and they weren't respecting it, then right now we rely on the community to report. Okay, so say we granted a certification, even now with the RESO endorsements we offer, we get data consumers saying all the time, well, these people are supposed to be certified, and yet we're seeing something different. Then when they report that, we have kind of an escalation process. So we could even go as far as revoking their certification. So for a client that passed, if MLS listings came back and said, actually, we found that they're doing this on their site, through your normal enforcement, then we could reach out and have a call or something with that client. And if they don't fix it, we'll just revoke their client certification at that point. I think that's kind of a clean way to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's working pretty well right now. Every data consumer reaches out to us several times a month. So usually we can fix those problems. So it's a good question.
All right. So it sounds like client certification is a desired event. So we should put it on the roadmap.
I got an email about it this morning, actually. We're starting to internationalize. We've got providers who want to build front-end of choice systems for ad edit. We can't certify them right now, so we don't know if they're doing things correctly or not.
Yep.
Right? And this is a common question that we get.
Well, especially for ad edit, I think that's absolutely critical that you get some certification for ad edit.
Yeah, and I hate to tell them, like, hey, we can't certify you. You want to be part of RESO. We just don't have anything for you right now. That kind of behavioral ad edit thing is really important.
Yep. Sounds good. Anything else on client cert? Or we can move on. Sure.
Is this strictly around the utilization, like the business rule side of things, or is this going to be around like data access and data patterns against like the providers that MLSs provide? Like, I know we've talked about rate limits before, and everyone has very different rules around that. It seems like something that might want to get baked into this as well, of like your utilization against like these different resources.
I mean, rate limits are good. We'll just start there for a second. So yeah, I mean, in the standards right now, and I think Sergio was going to talk about this, we have 429. If we give out a 429, they're not supposed to keep hammering us. So we could have a simulated 429 in client certification. And if we got any requests, we have a retry after as well. We can give that to them. If we keep getting requests for them in some interval, just fail them in certification at that point, right? They have to respect that 429. I think if we just go through kind of all those decisions we have, we'll always find a simple answer like that. In terms of rules, it's a lot harder. But there are two ways to deal with rules right now. With 10, ad edit, it's kind of a post-back approach, a callback, right? So we can tell somebody what the failure was and then ask them to post the correct thing given the callback. But if it's 19, we can get a little fancier there. So I think all these things have, easier solutions than trying to manually enforce it. We just need to have a clear definition of what we want to test. So I think any group that is going to talk about client certification, we should get together a list of things that people want us to test for, and then we can talk about how we can implement that.
New subgroup.
New subgroup. People are asking for this, though.
All right.
It's not just something today.
Oh, we should do it.
We get a lot of emails about this.
All right. Great. Oh, we hit pain points. So I've went through a bunch of stuff from the pain point session the other day, and then I went through the list of online, and I kind of put together what I thought we could talk about to some degree today. So delayed marketing exempt listing we talked about. There was two thoughts. One was a new status. It sounded like by the temperature of the room that probably not a new status because it's going to impact MLSs. They got to change their workflows. They got to deal with having a new status, which can actually be quite complicated for them. So one of the thoughts was to add a couple of fields. Delayed marketing exempt YN was the field name that sort of struck me as a logical field name, and delayed marketing exempt timestamp. So that sounds like the easiest way to deal with it. So what does the group think on that?
I have concerns including the timestamp.
Well, you need to include something to tell you the time at which it becomes on market, right?
Wouldn't you just change the exempt to no when it becomes on market?
So you're saying don't have the timestamp field at all and just rely on the server sending you the updated yes, no.
Because isn't it their job to do it anyway?
Yeah, that makes sense.
By including that timestamp, now there's going to be confusion. What am I supposed to do with this? And I'd rather, like, there should be one system of record that's responsible for working a listing through its life cycle. This to me feels like a life cycle field. That timestamp is going to get confusing unless there's downstream need to know, like, when it's going to happen is in terms of like it being an important thing to know, so it's not a surprise. If there's a business case for things to know when this is coming, then yeah. But then we need to make it clear that there is no expectation for downstream consumers to mutate the data. That no, you're going to get an update. It's now on the market.
That's very true. I think it would be totally on the server if we didn't have the timestamp field, and there would be no expectation for the client to deal with the timestamp later. Plus, then you've got timestamp, what exact time of the day is it going to happen, and all that stuff. I would definitely think that's a good idea. Yep.
So the recommendation on having a field for timestamp or something similar came from folks who, on the MLS side, thought it might be valuable for reporting. It wouldn't go out to the data consumers. They don't necessarily need to know, but it might be something for the broker, for the MLS themselves, the broker who has the listing, to be able to do reporting and knowing that. It may not be the solution, but that's why that suggestion had come up.
So it is good for information, then, is what you're saying. Informational field.
That's what the proposal was about.
Okay.
Sam, can I clarify? By timestamp, do you mean the time frame in which the listing stays exempt?
Folks had suggested tell them exactly when to make it go live.
Oh, so it could be date in the future.
So it's not a number of days, because then real estate people like to say business days or calendar days or holidays. And
Okay.
just this is when it goes live.
Okay, so
And
it's a
then-
timestamp kind of derived from internal business rules of specific MLS that will most likely be in the
It's
future.
probably a private field that can only be seen by the MLS operator, software system, and the listing broker potentially. But I'm not-
It makes sense for having it as a
That's what was explained.
And I can second that from an MLS side. We are expecting an automation to trigger based on that timestamp, and let the listing agent set that. So if they don't want to wait, or if the rule was 30 days, if they don't want to wait the full 30 days, if they want to do it in 25 days, that there's a data point to trigger an automation to move it to the next status.
Okay, yep. That makes sense. So it sounds like we're going to need to bring these two fields to Data Dictionary and have them added and have some discussion. Excellent. Another one I noticed on both, this is kind of both from the ones that were online and from the previous paint points, is there's still a lot of issues with modification timestamp. So we're still hearing people talking about things changing. Well, one of the ones is things change, but all of a sudden it's not in the API. And then that kind of makes sense because you might no longer have access to that listing. I think another problem I noticed several times is that the timestamp that the servers are outputting is not actually the API's timestamp, but the timestamp from the source system. And you can't replicate that successfully if you're doing that, because you're going to get backdated timestamps. You're going to get all kinds of strange stuff happening. And then we've also heard about future dating. I think we could test for future dating in cert tests. The other two, I don't know how we could test for. I'm not don't have any thoughts myself. I don't know if, Josh, you've thought about that at all, but I'm not thinking of anything that would fix that. I mean, I just think we got to bring it to the server's attention at this point that really, what do we do? Do we add some best practices, you know, talking about timestamp, try to get this issue resolved? Because this seems to me that it comes up a lot. Yep. So that's definitely something to talk about. Does anybody have any thoughts on how we can get server vendors to get the timestamps right? Yes. Okay, I forgot to mention the whole suggested solution. I mean, yeah, I kind of see a lot of this going away if we all move to entity event resource, right? Because that does solve all of these issues, assuming the vendors are doing entity event correctly, of course. Yes. Ryan.
Just back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, I'm kind of fascinated to find out that certification does not use other API timestamp field names when we are asked to use other API timestamp field names that are not modification timestamp.
Yeah, so they're all required to have modification timestamp correct for replication right now. If people are asking you to use other fields, that's kind of out of compliance. They can use other fields for other things. Modification timestamp and the key for every resource, those are the only two things RESO requires. And we require that we're able to go through and replicate correctly, so there might be some cases where we're missing records because something's happening somewhere else. I'm sure there are cases like that. That's really out of compliance. So you should report those cases when you're finding a provider who's asking you to use a separate timestamp. You need to support that modification timestamp field.
All right.
Oh, Jeff has something.
Jeff over there.
So the
See
one I
what
was
Jeff
going to
says
suggest that actually got demoed to me by someone yesterday, I couldn't believe it, was that origin modification timestamp is greater than modification timestamp. It should never.
Really? We could test for that, though.
That's something you can test for. That's
Yes.
why I wanted to get.
We can test for that, yeah. That's an interesting case, though.
One part up there that I don't see that I don't know if other consumers have this problem is we'll see modification timestamps get like sort of like back inserted. So we'll see things drop 40 minutes ago from when we had queried for that timestamp and it wasn't there. There's nothing in the spec around when data should be available, right?
Yeah, modification, maybe you could pull up the definition. It's an interesting field because definitely people are not complying with it right now. Basically, any update to the record is supposed to trigger a change there. Now, backdating, that's fine, but backdating it back so that you can't get it because you're asking for things greater, well, that's a little bit of a problem. Like, if they're going to change the record, it really needs to be bumped to the current timestamp, not 2 months ago.
Yeah, you really, as soon as you backdate, you're almost guaranteeing your clients are going to miss that data, right? So you really shouldn't do that.
Maliciously backdating, it's strictly like, okay, we've persisted this modification timestamp. The availability is not in APIs for upwards of 20, 30 minutes sometimes. And from our end, we can't tell the difference on a consumption side, but I don't know, is there like a reasonable SLA of like when this should be available compared to when the timestamp is? That seems something testable.
That's a good question. We don't have anything right now for that. We just kind of assume when somebody touches the record that they're going to bump the timestamp and that goes out the door immediately. And that's what the actual data dictionary definition says that it's supposed to be. So that's what we go by when we enforce these things. I'd love to put together kind of a set of use cases or just even providers where modification timestamp isn't functioning as expected, because there's probably some analysis we could do here. Maybe we need some other fields too, right? Like if they're backdating things or whatever, maybe there needs to be another field that they could use for that, or I'm curious to what some of these people are trying to solve by doing this kind of stuff. Doesn't make sense.
I think in a lot of cases it's just mistakes, people doing, DBA work in the background. That's a lot of the cases what we found.
Backdating's fine, but like the other things, like when they're waiting for that to go out, maybe that's just a server load thing, and in that case there are like maybe different ways, like entity event, that would cut that down at that point, right? If they're doing that for hundreds of thousands of records, and they're delaying it because they're worried that that's going to flood people or there's going to be problems with that, a better way to do that is entity event, because they can put them all in there at that point. If there's 100,000 records, the clients can just go through at their own speed. don't have to worry about
Yeah, and with the priority edition, then they could at least differentiate these batch updates. And then vendors wouldn't have to be worried about, not updating timestamp, because honestly, that's a big problem for all the vendors, is that the clients get all angry if you update more than like 10,000 records an hour. It's kind of crazy, but.
But the server shouldn't try to make decisions about what the clients can or can't do. That's really the client's responsibility, and so entity event shifts that responsibility back to the client instead.
Yeah, and I'll just put a checkbox in the entity event resolution kind of thing, because we are messing with modified timestamp to avoid flooding downstream systems. We touched 2 million listings to do the compensation update, but we couldn't process that. We're still processing it, and we expect it to take 6 months to sync the front-end systems.
Yeah.
Doing 10,000 listings a day. So again, we're continually and on accident flooding downstream systems with modified timestamps, so they're, our vendors kind of playing trickery to future date it, backdate it, don't update it at all, and then just ask the vendors downstream to do it nicely. And so again, the entity event solves most of that.
You just have to get people there. It's actually not too bad of a proposal unless you try to add a bunch of stuff to it. Like at the surface, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, no, it's fairly easy to implement from at least my experience, and we don't even have it as a second implementation right now. I believe it's still in the list.
We've got it.
You did.
It's ratified.
Okay.
But back to this data dictionary definition of modification timestamp, what's not in there right now is the fact that when DOM increments, sometimes the timestamp doesn't change, and we might want to look at the definition and kind of be very clear about that. You can't expect the record to change, the modification timestamp to change sometimes because of DOM. So people don't want to bump the timestamps the whole record every day and then send all those records out. So we just might want to be a little clearer about that, because there's a lot of requests we get where people say, well, isn't that supposed to have changed? We say, well, sometimes they don't bump it, sometimes they do bump it. It would be nice to spell those cases out in the definition.
Well, I think this is the one case is DOM.
Might be,
right?
but I'm curious if there's other ones floating around.
Jeff?
I was just going to say to that one, we should get Brian Berger's RCP through for the new DOM proposal, and then DOM being a calculated field that changes every day goes away.
The nice thing there is we already have 2 implementations of it, because you guys have implemented it, right? And then Cotali's also implemented it. So we're ready to move this thing for a vote, basically.
Yeah.
The next transport meeting.
Yep. Great. Okay. What else do we got? Oh, so this is... Nice. Do you need a mic? You want a mic right now?
It seems like such a simple thing to add the word private to pool on property. Can you guys get that done by Monday?
To add what?
Have private attached to pool on property. And have you can, but the circumstances under which
that's the one you're looking
a
at,
private
okay.
pool on the property and a community pool, you can see why you
Yeah.
didn't make it so you can't check both boxes, because it does happen, but there's definitely a difference.
No, yeah, and I get that. I think that obviously that is something that makes sense, and I say just the answer really is post it on the Data Dictionary Wiki and start a discussion, and then they'll talk about it, and they'll talk about changing it, and then participate in the Data Dictionary Workgroup. And they should be able to do that relatively quickly, especially with the new SEMVer minor version changes. Well, actually, no, this would be a breaking change. So yeah, this would be a little bit of a different concept. But we could definitely deprecate one, right, and not make it a breaking change. So there's ways to get that through fairly quickly.
Oh, mic drop.
All right. So the top one was the custom fields in the IDX resource. I know that came up. I'm not sure if that's really something we need to worry about, because I'm thinking, is it really a problem? I mean, if there's some extra fields in the resource, I mean, as a client, if it's not a standard IDX field, you could just ignore it, or you could just display a little field tag at the end of your result. Here's all the custom fields. I don't know. Is it really a problem?
One thing I'm curious about is, what do we mean by IDX resource? Because we don't actually have a resource. You mean a payload?
Sorry, yes.
No problem.
You're right.
So this is interesting. So RESO has its own definition, which was come up with by a group, quite a while ago for IDX. Those are just fields that they tag that look like they should be in the IDX payload. So that means that if you have it in your system, and you have an IDX feed, you might consider adding them. But there might be reasons in some cases why you don't. And sometimes there's fields that nobody would usually add to an IDX feed, like private remarks, that they actually show up in IDX feeds sometimes. So kind of like what Sergio, like RESO has a definition of what a bunch of subject matter experts in the work groups thought should be in there. Don't require providers to follow that. What we do is when we do certification on people, and I know we're talking about something else besides that, but the way we encourage IDX adoption is that we just score people on how many fields they implemented. So you'll get something like you implement 90% of the IDX payload, right? And usually that's information enough to at least, we want to get the things that are important that they're not including right now, because those are important to the IDX payload. For local fields that are additional, that's almost like an additional value added that a provider can put in there. If the clients are very, very concerned about whether that's in the IDX payload or not, you could do something like what Sergio said, and RESO already does this in certification. We know which fields are part of IDX, and we just tag them as that as part of certification. And any local fields, we just put them as local, right?
Yeah, and if the local fields are something that the IDX vendors really, really want, I think then at that point you bring the local fields to the data dictionary workgroup again and have them look at adding it to the IDX payload.
Absolutely, and we have data for this right now. So like, if your org has that field, when you ask for that request, we look for other things that are kind of similar out there. And sometimes if only one org has something in one implementation, it won't go forward. Usually we can find 10, 20, 30 implementations that are all kind of a different flavor of that. So really we need to bring that to the dictionary, figure out what that field does, get feedback from the community, and we can put that in the dictionary right away with this new model, right?
Right.
So.
So as it relates to the local fields and the RESO compliancy testing, often the fields that the MLS wants in the payload are duplicated with the RESO compliant fields, which just make the payloads bigger. And I don't know that you test for that because it's different from MLS to MLS, and it makes for a wider payload and more mapping work that's unnecessary. So as far as testing goes, is there thought?
So there's some cases where people want to leave data in kind of its initial form and they don't want to change it. But when they adopt the dictionary, things are slightly different, like the enumeration names are slightly different, or just the data types are different. So, ideally people would always have what's in the dictionary, do it the dictionary way, right? But we allow people to add their own local versions of those fields in addition to that. We have more sophisticated ways now to certify this. We have this fast track group where we've been looking at different variations of fields, right? And before, people just had RESO standard data in these local fields that they weren't giving out in dictionary format, right? So they're kind of hiding in those fields. Now we allow them to have that local data as long as they have the RESO thing. From your end, if you didn't want the larger payload, you could use select, for example, in OData just to select out fields you want. You'd probably have to do some analysis first to make sure that there's no data hiding in a local field. But yeah, I mean, those local fields are usually just supplemental. They're not, the way we test now, we make sure that if they have the local field, they're going to have the standard field. So you should always be able to code to that standard field. But I don't want to say that's 100%. There's probabilistic algorithms that do this, and then it's human review. We don't catch everything. We'll get there eventually, probably.
Basically, if it's RESO compliant, I can ignore the local fields if I see that it's automatic.
Yeah, so what he said is if it's RESO compliant, he could ignore the local fields as far as mapping goes. And that's true, as long as we've caught everything. So you'd want to do a check first to just make sure that if you use the RESO fields, you're not missing something. And if you do find you're missing things, then you can actually report that to us. That's another compliance violation. If they have a bunch of local data that they're showing you that could be mapped, they're not mapping it, and they're making you go to the local fields, that's something we could fix.
All right. I have one more slide. So record deletions versus soft deletions. There's been there was several requests for the deletions resource. I still think entity events is the better way to do that rather than pumping out a deletions resource. Thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I think it depends on industry rollout of entity events, how fast that happens compared to how fast the industry can roll out something else. I also agree that entity events does feel like the better way to do it, but it doesn't seem like entity events is rolling out very quickly. So yes, that may be the solution, but it is still a pain point.
Yeah, so that's obviously something. I think entity events will be able to be done faster because it already exists as a spec, right? If we have to do a deleted resource, we're going to take a lot longer. And I think a lot of the vendors now have entity events.
I was trying to think about the major vendors that have it. I think FBS does. I think you guys are rolling it out. Trying to think of some others. Constellation One does it, but they're kind of farther down from the MLS as an aggregator. And now we have Rely, which is ICE and RPR. They're doing it. But we might want to think about, and maybe there's a Sam question, how we can kind of have a campaign to strongly recommend that providers, we don't require things like this, but like this is really what you should be doing, and list maybe all the problems for the MLSs that it would solve. It will save them some money with their vendors because of repeat traffic and all these bulk updates, so that's a motivation right there. I mean, Sam, any thoughts?
I mean, would love to hear all your thoughts. Obviously, we should do some kind of a case study on the companies who have done this in their data consumers and what kind of benefits that came out of that. Some of these are newer, but being able to highlight those brands that are doing this on the provider side and then on the consumer side, what kind of benefits they're seeing. Be good to be able to get some eyeballs on that kind of content.
I mean, for MLS
makes
vendors
sense.
in the room or listening on the live stream, I mean, it's like a 10x savings in traffic. It's crazy. So if your vendors right now are just going to be charging you for that extra traffic, basically, they're passing the cost on to you. So it's
And it solves a lot of the problems that people are having, right? So I think if we can make a good push and convince the server vendors to do it, I think that'd be great.
even the first one up there on your list there, record deletions, right? Deletions are handled at entity event right now. People do all sorts of crazy ways right now to do this, and what that means is most clients are not going to get it correct. If the MLSs are expecting them to remove the records from the system, most likely they're not being removed right now. And then that's a compliance thing. So if MLSs really care about that level of compliance, the best way to ensure that records are being removed from those systems is entity event.
And if we can get the vendors to give us numbers, that's usually the most effective. When vendors can tell us it saved us X hours, which means X dollars and that sort of thing. So those that we know have been certified or have implemented but maybe not certified yet, really getting those concrete examples are helpful for incentivizing more companies to get started.
Sounds good, yeah. All right. Next one was custom fields. They're still being created, even though data dictionary fields exist for that, for that data. How do we fix it? Are the definitions in the data in the wiki not good enough? Is it easy enough for people to find these fields? I don't know. Thoughts? That's definitely a hard one.
Okay, Sam wanted me to repeat my comment, which is you can't fix stupid. But I'll add to that I just answered a conversation in one of the Facebook groups where somebody was talking about, we need to review our data fields. Do y'all do that through committee? Do you get together and look at and to which I responded, RESO already has a tool for that to review your fields, and you can see how they're used across. But that's what happens. Those conversations started, they put together a committee, and then they just randomly add fields without even checking to see if they're in the data dictionary. You can't fix stupid.
Yeah, and they can look at the data dictionary wiki, they can look at the spreadsheet, do searches, there's definitions. There's definitely a lot of stuff out there. that they can use to deal with it.
One of the suggestions that came up yesterday was just the naming of things. So if something is whatever whatever the lookup is, and then it has other because there's something else, like having other be on the other side of the definition. So if it was rooms, it was this, like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but when there's three things and then something is other in front, then it's in the O's and they're not mapped together, so people can miss grouped items if other is in the front versus being like an ad, like an ad.
You mean in the list that we show on the DD Wiki?
When you're looking something up, if the grouping isn't together because it's an other of that type, and then other is under O when you're looking it up.
Okay. Jason, did you have
This is a marketing and communications project for us, ongoing, forever, RDR. But it's always our job to continue communicating better and making it more clear and making sure these MLSs and their committees and boards are aware that there's a much better starting point. And obviously we can do that as staff, but membership helps us a lot with that as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say regarding better definitions, I did mention it in the data dictionary session yesterday, but there is a sheet. It's basically the 2.1 draft sheet posted on the data dictionary homepage, or it's on the forum, I should say. It's got revision proposals for about 200 fields and about 2,100 lookups. It's open for comment if people want to look at it. Comment on the individual definitions if they need any changes or improvement. But there's basically a column next to the standard definition column in the spreadsheet that says proposed new definition. So yeah, I just want to get some eyes on that, and we will definitely take any suggestions or changes there. So it is out there and available on the data dictionary forum. It's titled Data Dictionary Definition Revision.
Excellent. Good to know. Thank you. So we should all go there and take a look. Okay, last one I had. We got to the end. Obviously, buyers want photos removed after MLSs after it's removed from the MLS after it's closed, right? So media has got to go somewhere. And I think the idea that came up on how to fix it is media.permission equals private. Is that a good enough solution? Is it obvious? I mean, it's one of 5, I think, item lookup values that you can put in there. Is this good enough? Do we just have to document it better that if you want it removed from the MLS, it's private? Because I know it doesn't say that right now in the dictionary. I think Yvonne has something to say. I know it. No? Is that what you guys do? Yes?
That's how we implement it.
Yeah?
But as I've said a few times already, it does not seem to be respected on by downstream vendors, basically. We have it as part of our listing management. When agent changes status to sold, they have an option to hide photos that they want to be hidden. They can do it even post factum, few months, whatever, later.
Yep. Well, that's kind of why I brought it up, because I mean, it doesn't say specifically in the wiki that you're not supposed to display media that is private. So I'm thinking maybe this is another communications thing that RESO could do to get it out there so that all clients start respecting that, and maybe update the data dictionary wiki page to specifically state that if it's private, you should not be displaying that photo.
I have a comment.
All right.
I think this is more along the lines of the GDPR privacy thing. Once a new person owns the property, they would prefer that all of those photos are deleted hard deleted. So they're not in the content distribution network, they're not on your servers, they're gone. So I'm wondering if that's what the pain point really was, is they want hard deletions of those photos because now someone else owns the property. It's private information at that point. So I'm just wondering if we could get clarification on whether that is the actual thing they're asking for, in which case we can't add fields to it because that's an MLS server level thing and not part of the standard. Like this sounds like a hard deletion problem. That's it.
Yeah, it was unclear whether it was that far. I mean, the bottom line is the client doesn't want his photos out there after the house is sold, right? And private, I think, would solve it, because if they would take it off their websites if they had all of a sudden a bunch of records that suddenly showed up as private, and vendors, clients were supporting it, they would just take it off their public sites, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm assuming the MLS vendor would pull it off their public content delivery network as well. But that's just another thing I think we got to discuss a little more, sounds like, on media permission. Well, all right. We got to the end. I'd like to thank everybody for all your continued participation in transport. We wouldn't be here without all of you, so thank you very much.